The Road Back, a story of betrayal and triumph. I never thought I'd be the one writing one of these stories. You know the type: woman gets wronged, woman gets revenge, justice is served. But here I am, sharing mine because I think it might help someone else who's sitting in a hospital bed right now, feeling like their world has collapsed. The Awakening. I remember the accident in flashes. The screech of tires. A blinding light. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room came into focus. My body felt like it had been run over by a train, which wasn't far from the truth. A semi had T-boned my car at an intersection. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been in a medically induced coma. 3 weeks of my life gone. But that wasn't even the worst part. Where is David? I asked the nurse when my throat finally allowed words to form. David, my husband of 7 years. David, who had promised to love me in sickness and in health. The nurse gave me a strange look before mumbling something about calling the doctor. An hour later, my sister Kate burst into the room, her face a mixture of relief and something else, something that made my stomach twist into knots. "Thank God you're awake," she said, squeezing my hand so tight it hurt. "We were so worried." "Where is David?" I repeated. Kate's face fell. She looked away, then back at me, tears forming in her eyes. "Megan, there's something you need to know. The betrayal." David hadn't visited once during my 3 weeks in the hospital. Not once. Why? 'Cause he was busy. Busy moving my so-called best friend Amber into our house. Our dream house that we had spent years saving for, that we had lovingly renovated together, where we had talked about raising children someday. "He thought you might not make it," Kate explained, trying to soften the blow. "And he and Amber, they've apparently been seeing each other for about a year." A year? While I was working 60-hour weeks at my marketing firm to help pay for our house renovations, while I was planning our anniversary trip, while I was talking about starting a family, my husband was sleeping with my best friend. I didn't cry. Not then. I think I was still too numb, too caught between the fog of medication and the surreality of my new existence. Instead, I asked Kate for my phone. "Megan, I don't think that's a good idea right now," she warned. But I insisted, and eventually she relented. With shaking hands, I opened Instagram. There they were. David and Amber, together at our favorite restaurant. David and Amber walking our dog, Max. David and Amber on our front porch, his arm around her waist, both smiling like they were posing for a fucking Christmas card. The caption on the most recent photo: "Sometimes life gives you a second chance at happiness. #blessed. That's when I finally broke. When the nurses came running in, I was screaming, a raw, primal sound that didn't even seem human. They sedated me, and I slipped back into darkness. The assessment. When I woke up again, it was morning. Kate was sleeping in the chair beside me, her neck at an awkward angle. I watched the sunrise through the window, feeling oddly calm. The rage had burned out, leaving behind something colder, clearer. I took inventory. I was alive. I had a concussion, 4 broken ribs, a broken femur, and various cuts and bruises. My car was totaled. My husband was living with my best friend in my house. My savings were tied up in that house and our joint accounts. Most people would say I had nothing. I disagreed. I had something powerful. I had the element of surprise. You see, David didn't know I was awake. As far as he was concerned, I was still in a coma, possibly dying. And as long as he thought that, he wouldn't be covering his tracks. I asked Kate to keep my awakening quiet. Just for a few days. She didn't understand at first, but when I explained, her eyes lit up with a fierce, protective gleam. "What do you need?" she asked. "My laptop. And a really good lawyer." The investigation. Over the next week, while physically recovering in the hospital, I began my digital excavation. David had always been careless with passwords, one of his many flaws that I had found endearing once upon a time. Now it was his undoing. Our shared cloud storage was a goldmine. I found emails between him and Amber dating back 14 months. I found evidence that they had been using our joint savings to book weekend getaways while telling me he was on business trips. I found texts where they discussed what they would do with the house after Megan's gone. But the real jackpot came when I accessed our financial records. David hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been stealing from me. From our business. 3 years ago, we had started a small digital marketing agency together. I was the creative director, he handled the finances. The business had been doing well, or so I thought. Looking at the books now, I realized he had been siphoning money into a separate account. His retirement fund, he had called it when I once noticed it on a statement. In reality, it was his escape fund. Nearly $200,000 of company profits that should have been reinvested or split between us. I documented everything meticulously. Every transfer, every deception. All while he thought I was lying unconscious, fighting for my life. The lawyer Kate found for me, a shark named Vanessa with stiletto heels and a smile that could cut glass, nearly cried tears of joy when I showed her what I'd found. "This is beautiful," she said. "Absolutely beautiful. He's not just a cheater, he's a thief. And we're going to nail him to the wall." The strategy. By day 10, I was cleared to leave the hospital. But instead of going home, or what used to be home, I moved in with Kate. As far as David knew, I was still comatose. The hospital staff, moved by my situation and legally bound by patient confidentiality, agreed to maintain the ruse if he called to check on me. He didn't. Vanessa and I formulated a plan. It wasn't just about divorce, it was about justice. About rebuilding. First, we quietly transferred my personal inheritance from my grandmother, which David didn't know about, into a new, secure account. Next, we documented the state of the house through Kate, who drove by regularly and took photos of David and Amber's comings and goings. We gathered statements from friends who knew about the affair. We contacted the clients of our business to secure their loyalty. Then we waited for the perfect moment. Came 3 weeks after I woke up. David and Amber were throwing a party at my house. A new beginnings party, according to the Facebook event that one of our mutual friends, now my loyal spy, had been invited to. They had invited our entire social circle, our business partners, even David's parents, who had always treated me like a daughter. The night of the party, I put on the red dress I had bought for our anniversary, the one David had never seen. I did my hair, applied makeup to cover the remaining bruises, and borrowed Kate's car. "Are you sure about this?" Kate asked as she helped me with my earrings. I met her eyes in the mirror. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The reckoning. I timed my arrival for 9 p.m. when the party would be in full swing. I could hear the music from the driveway, see the shadows of people through our front windows. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. David opened it, drink in hand, smile freezing on his face as he registered who was standing before him. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "Aren't you going to invite me in? It is my house, after all." His face went through a spectacular range of emotions: shock, fear, confusion, and finally a pathetic attempt at joy. "Megan," he exclaimed too loudly. "You're awake. This is amazing." Behind him, conversations were dying as people noticed the confrontation at the door. Amber appeared in the hallway, her expression like someone who had just seen a ghost. "I hope I'm not interrupting," I continued, walking past David into my own home. "I just thought I should be here. Since you're celebrating new beginnings and all." The room fell silent. I recognized everyone, friends, colleagues, neighbors. They stared at me in collective shock. "Everyone," I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Thank you for coming to celebrate David and Amber's new beginning. I think it's only appropriate that I'm here too, don't you? After all, their new beginning started with my ending. Or at least what they hoped would be my ending. David stepped forward, reaching for my arm. Megan, you're confused. The accident. I cut him off. I'm not confused, David. For the first time in a long time, I see things very clearly. I turned to address the room. While I was fighting for my life, my husband and my best friend were planning their future in my house. They'd been having an affair for over a year. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw David's parents, their faces ashen with shock and what looked like shame. But that's not even the worst part, I continued. David has been embezzling from our company. Over $200,000 so far. I turned to our business partners, who were looking at David with growing horror. I have all the documentation. I'll be sending it to each of you tomorrow. Amber finally found her voice. You can't just come in here and... Actually, I can, I interrupted. This is my house too. My name is on the deed. And as of this morning, I filed for divorce and reported the financial fraud to the authorities. I looked directly at David. They'll be here with a warrant soon, so you might want to wrap up the party. The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, people began gathering their things, murmuring awkward goodbyes, casting glances between David, Amber, and me. David's father approached me, his eyes wet. We didn't know, he said quietly. We had no idea. I believe you, I replied. But now you do. As the last guests filed out, David finally snapped. You think you've won, he snarled, his charming facade completely gone. You have nothing. No job, no house, no husband. You're broken, Megan. I smiled at him, and I could tell from his expression that it unsettled him. That's where you're wrong, David. I'm not broken. I'm rebuilt. And you're about to find out what that means. The resurrection. The next 6 months were a whirlwind. David was arrested for financial fraud. With the evidence I had gathered, the case was open and shut. He took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, but still ended up with 2 years in prison. Amber, who swore she knew nothing about the financial side of things, which might even have been true, was nonetheless named as a conspirator in the civil suit I filed. She moved back to her parents' house in Ohio, her reputation in tatters. The house was sold as part of the divorce settlement. I didn't want it anyway, too many tainted memories. The business was another matter. Our clients, horrified by David's actions and impressed by my resilience, stayed loyal. I rebranded, hired new talent, and within 3 months we were more profitable than ever. I moved into a downtown loft with huge windows and no memories. I adopted a rescue dog. Not to replace Max, whom David had kept, but to save another soul that needed healing, just like I had. The medical bills from the accident were substantial, but the lawsuit against the trucking company, whose driver had been texting, resulted in a settlement that covered them and then some. I used part of that money to start a foundation for women rebuilding their lives after trauma. My story somehow found its way to a producer at a major podcast network. Awakening, a true story of betrayal and rebirth, debuted at #1 on the charts and stayed there for weeks. The outpouring of support from listeners was overwhelming. Thousands of messages from people who had faced their own betrayals and were inspired by how I had handled mine. 1 year after the accident, I found myself sitting on the rooftop deck of my new loft, watching the sunset with Kate and a few true friends. My body had healed. My business was thriving. My foundation had helped dozens of women. And though I wasn't quite ready to date again, I had met someone, a reader who had reached out after my story went viral, who made me feel that maybe someday I could trust again. Do you ever think about them? Kate asked as we sipped wine. David and Amber? I considered the question. Sometimes, I admitted, but not in the way you might think. I don't hate them anymore. That would mean they still have power over me. So what do you feel? She pressed. I smiled, watching the last rays of sun disappear behind the city skyline. Gratitude. Gratitude? She echoed, surprised. Yes. If it weren't for them, I never would have discovered how strong I really am. I never would have rebuilt myself into someone I'm actually proud to be. I raised my glass. So here's to rock bottom, the foundation on which I built everything. They say living well is the best revenge. I disagree. Living authentically is. David wanted to leave me with nothing, but instead, he forced me to discover everything I was capable of. In trying to destroy me, he accidentally set me free. I sometimes wonder if he realizes that, sitting in his prison cell, thinking about all he lost. I wonder if Amber realizes it, back in her hometown, starting over from scratch. I wonder if they know that in trying to write my ending, they actually wrote their own. As for me, I'm just getting started. The end.